What if the global symphony of voices, carried by wires and waves, had a different conductor? Our journey begins in a small Boston laboratory in 1876. There, Alexander Graham Bell and Elisha Gray raced to patent the telephone. Both arrived at the patent office that very same day. But in a twist of fate, Elisha Gray's caveat, or a more comprehensive patent from the overshadowed Antonio Musi, arrived hours before Bell's. This narrow victory detonated a different future for global communication. Bell's claims were challenged. The primary vision and technical standard for the telephone now rested with a different mind or corporation. Gray, a shrewd businessman, or Musi, a passionate visionary, now shaped the very architecture of how the world spoke. Their designs, perhaps more complex or less intuitive, became the blueprints for an entirely different kind of connection, starkly contrasting Bell's simplicity. The immediate impact was an entirely different telecommunications landscape. Early telephony transformed into a chaotic, competitive frontier instead of a unified Bell system. Consider late 19th century cities, not with consistent telephone poles, but a chaotic tangle of wires. Myriad companies emerged, each with incompatible technologies, all claiming superiority. For instance, Fluid Voice offered crystalline clarity but suffered from leaks and needed frequent refills. This made it a delicate parlor phone for the elite, valued for its lifelike, if temperamental, audio. Its fragile components required specialist, fluid voice technicians who were highly sought after, often arriving by horse-drawn carriage to carefully reprime the liquid transmitter with its special saline solution. Conversely, the iron tongue was rugged but muffled. It excelled in noisy factories and bustling docks. Its robust carbon button design withstood dust and vibration, making it the workhorse phone of industry, where reliability outweighed fidelity. These industrial units were often bolted directly to factory walls, their dull thud when answering a call a familiar sound in bustling workshops. Each system held unique quirks and vulnerabilities. This turned a simple call into a frustrating gamble. Take Mr. Thomas Sterling, a Boston merchant. He needed to confirm a cotton shipment from Atlanta. He couldn't just dial a number. First, he'd consult his Intercity Communications Handbook, a thick, annually updated tome listing regional telephone companies and their known compatibility. His Elisha Gray standard phone couldn't directly connect to Atlanta's Southern Voice and Telegraph. He'd place a call to his local switching house, a private enterprise specializing in cross-network transfers. An operator there would receive his message, perhaps transcribe it, then physically redial it on a Southern Voice line, relaying his words, and the supplier's response, in real time or by message. This process was expensive, prone to delays, and often laden with static or transcription errors. Mr. Sterling might wait hours, even days, for a confirmed reply, relying heavily on backup telegrams for urgency. These switching houses became bustling hubs, filled with the murmur of operators shouting across rooms and the frantic tapping of telegraph keys as messages moved from one network to another, a true nexus of information exchange in a disconnected world. The operators themselves became an indispensable class, often working grueling shifts, their voices hoarse from constant relaying. They developed an almost encyclopedic knowledge of regional telephone company quirks, knowing which connections were typically clearer or which operators in distant cities were most reliable. This was a job requiring immense patience and an acute ear, often passed down through families who lived near the central exchange buildings. Calling a relative in another city would often prove futile. Your Gray phone couldn't connect with their Musi device due to differing systems, often requiring distinct hardware and separate subscriptions. This profound lack of interoperability crippled widespread adoption for decades. It was as if the global network spoke 1,000 different tongues. Cities developed unique telephone accents based on their dominant local technology, a crisp gray tone in Chicago, or the tinny sound from a consolidated telephony device in St. Louis. Callers learned to recognize these sonic signatures, instantly knowing which network they were on, and which calls might be impossible without a costly, multi-stage transfer. Connection became less a right, more a privilege, confined by specific network boundaries. A national phone book was impossible. It was replaced by countless regional directories, often published by individual phone companies, limiting their scope. These directories became coveted items, trading hands on secondary markets for exorbitant prices, especially those covering bustling commercial routes. Travel agencies, beyond booking trains, specialized in providing multi-company phone directories for business trips, a curious footnote in a world yearning for connection. This fragmentation also birthed the switching house. These private enterprises physically relayed messages between different networks. They employed armies of scribes and translators. These human brokers, often polyglots with exceptional memories, became a new elite of information brokers. Their bustling offices, filled with relayed conversations and scratching pens, were the true hubs of long-distance communication. For the working class, access was often limited to a single company's service, or perhaps a public pay-per-minute booth found in general stores, where queues would form and conversations were often rushed and overheard. The privacy of modern phone calls was a distant concept. The economic implications are monumental. The colossal wealth and influence consolidated by AT&T and the Bell system in our timeline are now scattered among countless competing entities. This market became a fierce battleground for patents and market share. Companies poured vast resources into legal disputes instead of network expansion. Courtrooms were as busy as switchboards, bogged down with injunctions, countersuits, and battles over transmission rights. This legal quagmire stifled genuine innovation. Firms focused on defending their turf. Corporate espionage shifted to the theft of unique protocols, creating a shadowy underworld of technical consultants. These shadowy figures, often disgruntled former employees or rogue engineers, commanded high fees for their knowledge of rival systems. Each company fiercely guarded its proprietary technology, viewing standardization as weakness. This mirrored the competing railway gauges that once complicated travel and trade across vast regions, where goods had to be unloaded and reloaded at specific interchange points, adding immense cost and delay. Without a dominant, unifying force, telephone lines spread slowly into rural areas. This deepened the urban-rural communication divide. Towns might only connect to immediate neighbors, fostering smaller, more localized economies and social circles, limiting the free flow of labor and capital. A farmer in Iowa couldn't easily call a Chicago buyer. He'd rely on mail or expensive telegrams, causing delays that might mean the difference between profit and loss for his harvest. Perishable goods, for example, would be far riskier to transport long distances without real-time coordination, leading to more localized food markets and potentially higher prices due to less efficient distribution. The globalized economy we know, reliant on instantaneous communication, would develop at a snail's pace. This profoundly altered international trade and supply chains. Business decisions, market fluctuations, and investment opportunities moved at the speed of the telegraph or even mail. The very concept of a national, long-distance call as a common service might not emerge until the mid-20th century, if at all, remaining a luxury for the privileged few or government use. This placed a premium on physical presence. Regional offices and extensive travel became more necessary, inflating costs and slowing reaction times across industries. Traveling salesmen, with their sample cases and thick communication handbooks, would be far more common and vital for commerce than in our timeline. Financial markets reacted slowly to global events. This reduced volatility but hindered rapid growth and integration. News from distant markets was hours, even a day, old, favoring long-term investments and on-the-ground intelligence. Trading floors buzzed with human runners carrying printed telegrams, reacting to news that was already stale. Industries reliant on coordinated supply chains faced immense logistical hurdles. This forced them to remain more localized or less efficient, with goods taking longer to move from production to consumption. The rise of multinational corporations was slower. Their organizational structures leaned on decentralized regional leadership due to difficult real-time central control. Corporate executives might fly transatlantic once a month to hold crucial, face-to-face meetings that, in our world, would be a quick conference call. Education suffered. Scientific ideas and academic collaboration moved slowly, relying on publications, physical models, and infrequent, costly conferences. Researchers often worked in isolation, unaware of parallel discoveries happening across the globe. Scientific breakthroughs might languish in isolated university labs for years, delaying progress across many fields. This lack of rapid information exchange even slowed medical advancements. New treatments might not disseminate quickly across borders, leading to regional healthcare disparities. Disease outbreaks were harder to track and contain. Crucial information on symptoms and treatments traveled too slowly. Public health campaigns would rely on broad print media and door-to-door visits, severely limiting their responsiveness. Culturally, the rhythm of life itself shifted. Without a single, standardized telephone network, face-to-face interaction, telegrams, and handwritten letters remained vital for much longer. Imagine waiting days or weeks for a letter from a loved one overseas, a daughter in London, a son serving abroad. Carefully chosen words, deliberately written, carried far more weight than a fleeting phone call. They served as historical records of personal thoughts, cherished and reread for years, passed down through generations. Such letters often detailed daily life, community news, and carefully considered advice, unlike spontaneous phone conversations. Urgent news still meant a hurried dash to the telegraph office. The clatter of keys became the sound of impending change, often delivered by a uniformed messenger boy on a bicycle. This was a common street sight for decades longer. Their cries of his telegram evoked excitement and apprehension, a sudden disruption to a quiet afternoon. These nimble, resourceful boys became the literal lifeline for immediate communications. Their routes and speeds were critically important. Holidays and family events relied on meticulous planning and physical travel, not spontaneous calls. This reinforced familial bonds through shared effort and anticipation. The shared experience of waiting for a letter or telegram bound communities, as neighbors might inquire about awaited news. This fostered a deeper sense of local community reliance and resilience. The very idea of reaching out and touching someone via instant call took much longer to embed itself. It might remain a luxury, an oddity, or a business tool for the very wealthy, reserved for life or death situations. Public phones, if they existed, were rare. They were dedicated to a specific network, perhaps requiring a specific token, confusing to the unfamiliar. A frustrated traveler might carry a pouch of different company tokens, hoping to find a compatible device. This made spontaneous communication nearly impossible for the average citizen. This lack of easy, private communication also meant that public spaces and personal interactions were inherently less permeable by external calls, maintaining a distinct boundary between the private sphere of the home and the public world. Young couples from different towns navigated courtship through prolonged dances of letters and rare, meticulously prearranged visits. This shaped deeper, more deliberate relationships. It also led to more geographical limits on marriage, increasing the likelihood of marrying within one's immediate community. The concept of dating long distance was almost mythical. It required immense dedication, financial resources, and deep patience, truly reserved for the most committed. This slow pace also fostered stronger local identities and loyalties, as communities relied more heavily on internal connections than external ones. Local gossip networks and community newspapers held even greater sway, disseminating information that in our timeline would have traveled by phone. Community halls, local pubs, and church gatherings would remain primary venues for social interaction and information sharing for generations longer. The soundscape of daily life in major cities was less punctuated by insistent phone rings. Instead, it featured the rhythmic staccato tap of telegraph keys from offices. Hurried footsteps of messenger boys delivered dispatches. The gentle rustle of paper accompanied people reading and rereading correspondence, cherishing each word. They might even bind these into personal archives. This slower pace profoundly impacted social norms. Would the 20th century nuclear family have developed differently without constant distant connection? Family networks might remain more geographically concentrated, or diaspora communities struggle to maintain ties, fostering longing and separation. This might accelerate assimilation due to weaker homeland ties. Fewer popular songs would celebrate phone calls. Literature would depict communication differently, focusing on romantic letter anticipation or telegram logistics. Novels might feature characters waiting anxiously by the mail slot, or the dramatic arrival of a telegram boy, rather than the casual ring of a phone. The iconic telephone booth might never exist in the same form. It would be a niche, non-interoperable design, symbolizing division. Its purpose: specific, limited calls, not universal access. The rapid spread of fads, ideas, and revolutionary political movements was tempered by slow, cumbersome information flow. This subtly altered social evolution, perhaps favoring dominant print media for longer. Public discourse evolved slowly, with less immediacy. This led to a more reflective society, but also one less agile in rapid response. Consequences impacted everything from emergency response to cultural trends. Celebrity culture might be delayed. Personal privacy, paradoxically, was more guarded, as casual, eavesdroppable phone calls were less common. The art of letter writing, emphasizing eloquence, experienced a renaissance. Schools taught penmanship and epistolary etiquette, recognizing their importance. This influenced formal public address and appreciation for well-crafted arguments. Emergency services relied on complex telegraph lines and human runners. This made coordinated disaster responses significantly slower, potentially increasing casualties in fires or floods. A national emergency broadcast system was much harder to implement. Even local news could be severely delayed, with critical updates taking hours to reach affected neighborhoods, prolonging chaos and anxiety during crises. Geopolitical delays and technological divergence. On the global stage, information flow was slower, more deliberate. Diplomatic communication still heavily relied on the telegraph for urgency. Direct, crucial personal relationships between leaders, often forged by phone calls, developed slower, or not at all. Summits and international agreements took longer to negotiate. Quick, informal phone consultations were impossible. Delegates spent weeks or months in person, awaiting instructions from distant capitals via slow, secure telegraphs. The subtle nuances of voice, the immediate response, were lost to telegrams' cold precision. Every word was chosen for explicit meaning, leaving no room for intonation. Imagine a major international crisis. Leaders communicated through coded telegrams taking hours to send, decode, and respond to. Each was a carefully crafted diplomatic pronouncement, not a quick discussion. The risk of misinterpretation was ever present. Lack of direct vocal inflection heightened this. An ambiguous phrase could fester for days, escalating into larger conflicts. De-escalation became far more difficult. This led to more cautious foreign policies, but also greater risks of miscalculation. Rapid intelligence exchange, vital for crisis response, was severely hampered. Spy networks relied on elaborate human chains, dead drops, and microphotography, not intercepted calls. This slower pace subtly altered early 20th century conflicts and alliances. It led to more prolonged negotiations or misunderstandings escalating from a lack of immediate, nuanced communication. The very speed of global events felt different. Crucial decisions unfolded over days, not hours. This led to different outcomes in pivotal history moments, from World War I to the response to the Great Depression. Swift, coordinated international financial responses were hindered by lags, possibly prolonging economic downturns. Military command and control during wartime relied largely on telegraph and dispatch riders, impacting battlefield dynamics and strategic coordination. Commanders made decisions with less up-to-the-minute information. This led to more decentralized or cautious strategies, and perhaps longer conflicts with higher casualties due to delayed orders. Rapid conflict escalation, often reliant on miscommunication or immediate reactions, was less common. Yet, global politics' overall pace slowed considerably. Covert operations relied heavily on human couriers and coded messages, making large-scale espionage far more challenging, favoring spy rings over technological surveillance. International diplomacy retained a more formal, measured tone. Treaties and agreements took years longer to finalize. The very concept of a hotline between superpowers was a distant dream. Moments like the Cuban Missile Crisis became far more perilous, less likely to be resolved through rapid, direct dialogue. This shifted global power dynamics, possibly increasing outright conflict, pushing the world closer to the brink on multiple occasions. International sporting events, cultural exchanges, and disaster relief efforts faced greater difficulty and took more time. Organizing global events like the Olympic Games would become logistical nightmares, requiring years of advanced planning and extensive physical travel for coordination committees. International scientific conferences would be rarer, expensive undertakings, limiting the cross-pollination of ideas. Technologically, the path of voice communication truly diverged. Faced with fragmented wired networks, alternative, non-bell technologies like early radio telephony or rudimentary visual communication systems received significantly more investment and development. Inventors, frustrated by wired chaos, pivoted their research. Guglielmo Marconi's early radio, initially for telegraphy, saw its voice capabilities fast-tracked. This led to earlier wireless communication breakthroughs. Radio potentially became the dominant form of long-distance voice communication much sooner, bypassing extensive physical infrastructure. This meant rudimentary voice broadcasts and two-way radio conversations became common decades before reliable wired telephone networks spanned nations. It effectively leapfrogged the wired age for long distances, especially in remote areas or across oceans, leading to an earlier, though perhaps less clear, global connectivity. Early radio sets, initially bulky and unreliable, would quickly miniaturize and gain range, becoming a vital tool for shipping, aviation, and military communication, establishing a strong precedent for wireless over wired in long-haul scenarios. This would also spark an earlier boom in amateur radio operators, creating a vast, informal global network of wireless enthusiasts who might even informally relay messages for those unable to afford official services. Early experiments in picture transmission or rudimentary video conferencing were pushed further, earlier. This was driven by the desperate need for universal communication as companies bypassed wired limitations. Inventors like Paul Nipkow or John Logie Baird found their work more aggressively funded. The very dream of transmitting moving pictures with sound accelerated, not primarily for entertainment, but as a practical necessity for remote communication. This laid groundwork for a visual communication future that predated widespread voice telephony, focusing on image and data transfer over pure voice. Picture executives conducting telemeetings with grainy, flickering images and text overlays, not clear audio calls. These technologies evolved much faster, driven by the desperate need to overcome wired disunity. This led to a patchwork of innovative, yet perhaps still incompatible, solutions. Imagine a large corporation in the 1940s investing heavily in its own proprietary internal image phone network, connecting only its key branches, a sort of corporate intranet of visual communication that remained disconnected from public networks. This could give rise to early forms of corporate-specific network security, as businesses had to protect their vital, unique communication pathways. Imagine a world where the telephone wasn't a single, unified concept. It was a family of disparate technologies: Gray's electromagnetic system for local calls, Musey's delicate magnetoelectric devices for intracity connections, and a burgeoning radio-based system for international calls. Each required specialized equipment and operators. Bell's sleek design, user-friendliness, and scalability were its hidden strengths. Without them, the technological landscape became a maze of competing, clunky devices. The eventual universal telephone system might emerge much later, a cobbled-together patchwork. Or perhaps only after major government intervention to standardize the entire industry, like broadcast radio spectrum was eventually regulated. This could manifest as international treaties forcing common standards, or a global communications body emerging earlier than the ITU. It would be born of necessity and frustration, perhaps after a major international communication failure, like a delayed response to a global pandemic or a critical economic collapse exacerbated by poor communication. The very device we hold today would look, feel, and operate fundamentally differently. It might incorporate wired and wireless elements from its inception, a testament to a long, arduous journey to global connectivity. The sleek, ubiquitous smartphone would be a much later invention, if it arrived in a recognizable form. Instead, we'd see a proliferation of specialized devices, each serving a niche purpose, lacking the modern phone's convergent magic. Personal communication might remain largely text-based, advanced telegraphy, teletypes, specialized short-range radio bursts. Voice calls would be premium, shared, or formal. The concept of personal space would be less permeable by instant calls. The line between public and private communication would remain sharper. The entire digital age could be profoundly delayed or rerouted. Foundational wired networks enabling early computing and internet protocols might not develop with the same speed or universality. The world might rely on complex webs of interconnected, technically distinct, data networks. This would make the early internet a far more fragmented and less accessible place, resembling private intranets. Early computing could be more isolated, lacking a robust, universal communication backbone. This would hinder rapid software proliferation and online services, pushing the personal computer revolution back decades. The idea of widespread home computers, linked globally, would seem fantastical. Telecommuting, or remote work, would remain sci-fi for longer, impacting urban planning and daily commutes. This led to denser cities and less outward migration, as proximity to work and services remained paramount. Urbanization trends might be even stronger, concentrating populations in communication hubs, creating supercities where physical presence was key to economic success and social life. Perhaps even the development of specific programming languages would be influenced by the need to bridge incompatible data systems. The very concept of a cyberspace, or a World Wide Web, as we know it, might evolve into something entirely different, perhaps a collection of localized, specialized digital communities rather than one vast, interconnected network. Public access to these early digital resources might be limited to specialized data houses or libraries, much like the switching houses for voice. In this alternate history, the world connects, but perhaps not as seamlessly, or as quickly, as in our timeline. The triumph of a different inventor, or a crucial patent's failure, means that the sound of a voice traveling across continents, though eventually realized, takes a longer, more winding path to become the ubiquitous reality we know today. The echoes of Gray's or Musey's vision, rather than Bell's, would define the early sonic landscape of a connected world, a testament to a path not taken, a future reshaped by mere hours. This world would eventually connect, perhaps through difficult, hard-won compromises between warring corporations or even nationalized communication systems. This would make the global network a mosaic of different historical and technological decisions, rather than the relatively uniform system we inherited. The information age might dawn later, or with a different fundamental infrastructure, where voice communication is less central than data or visual transmission for much of its early history. The very definition of connectedness would be fundamentally different, more arduous, and more exclusive for generations. This would profoundly impact the pace of innovation, globalization, and human interaction for over a century. This reality might foster a greater reliance on physical travel, personal meetings, and a more deliberate, less impulsive approach to decision-making, in stark contrast to the rapid-fire communication that shaped our own history. The sheer effort required to communicate would instill a greater value in each message, each connection, perhaps leading to deeper, more meaningful, albeit fewer, long-distance relationships and collaborations.